Hello guys, welcome to the next session of developing e-commerce application from scratch using Angular and Spring Boot. In the last session we discussed on introductory part about this new series. Like we discussed what we are going to develop throughout this new series. So we are going to develop e-commerce application using Angular and Spring Boot. The next thing that we discussed previously is how we are going to learn throughout this series, the roadmap to this series, and the last thing that we discussed is what are all the different technologies, what are all the different things that you will get from this series. So you will get knowledge of Angular, Spring Boot, and also you will get knowledge of database, and the most important thing that the knowledge that you will get is a project management. So this is the most important thing that we are going to learn throughout this series along with the new technology stacks. In this session we are going to see how we can set up our front end and backend project. So whenever we start any new projects, we have to make sure that all the required applications and software to develop the project, we have to make sure that all these supporting softwares are installed on our machine. And if everything is installed, then the next step that we have to take is we have to configure the project. So we have to set up the UI project, we have to set up the backend project, alongside we have to set up the database as well. So this is the step that we are going to perform in this session. So over here, if you see, I have two different links. So first one is a UI project link and second one is a backend project link. So basically these are the projects that I use whenever I get any new requirements or whenever I have to start any new projects. So UI, obviously we have the Angular, and for the backend we have the Spring Boot. So this basically contains a code to the JWT token and role based authentication mechanism. We have already seen that how we can implement JWT token and role based authentication mechanism in Angular and Spring Boot. So I'm not going to repeat those sessions again, but I'll just provide link into a description box. You can just check out those videos, and also I will add those two videos in a playlist as well. So you can just, if you want to, you can just check out those videos. But again, I just wanted to you provide a one pro tip that I basically follow. So whenever I get any new requirement specifically for Angular and Spring Boot, so I just try to find the common things. So let's suppose if I currently am developing e-commerce application, and let's suppose after some days if I get any new requirement, like let's suppose student management application, and both of these applications are web-based application, let's assume. So in both of these applications we have some common things, right? So we have the technical stack as a common. So for both of these applications we can use Angular and Spring Boot. And the second thing is we have one more common thing, which is a security. So for the security, I basically prefer JWT token and role based authentication mechanism. So in both of the project, I need to write a code for JWT. So why should I waste my time to write these twice, right? So instead what I basically do is I have just wrote my JWT code once for the Angular and for the Spring Boot as well. I kept it on my GitHub repository. Whenever I get any new requirement, I just clone those repository. I just rename the projects. So if I'm going to develop e-commerce application, so we will just rename these UI and backend project as e-commerce application. If I will start working on student dashboard or student management project, then I'll just rename these UI and backend project as a student management projects. And I don't need to waste my time into writing the JWT code. Instead, JWT will be already there. I just need to write my next step or whatever the next features that I want to develop. I can just spend a time to developing those features. So this is what I just wanted to highlight. So similarly, what you can just do is you can implement these JWT kind of code once. You can just keep it on keep these kind of templates on your machine or on any GitHub repository. Whenever you will get any new requirements, you can just clone those repository and start working on it. So without wasting much more time, let me just copy this UI project link. Let me just go to the Google Chrome and let me just hit the URL, and over here you will see that there is one GitHub repository opened, which is having the name as jwt-youtube-ui, and by the name you can understand that this is a UI code, which is basically Angular project. So over here on the code we have multiple options. So if you are using git bash or git like git bash or any kind of git supporting application like tortoise, then you can obviously clone the repository by using this URL. If you don't want to use the GitHub or Git, and if you don't have any git bash installed on your machine, then you can directly click on download zip a link. Then it will download one zip folder, and you can extract this zip which in whichever location you want, and you can just follow the steps. So as of now, download is pretty simple, so I'm not going to explain that one. So I'm just going to explain how we can clone the repository. So let me just first of all copy the URL, and then what we have to do is we have to go to our location where we want to clone the repository. So inside my finder we have one folder that is called as a project, and inside this we have one again we have one folder that is called as a YouTube. Inside this I have one more folder which is e-commerce app. Let me just try to open the terminal at this particular location, and then over here we have to just use git clone command, and then we have to paste the URL. Make sure that you are connected to the internet, because it is going to download the repository from your GitHub account to your local machine. And now our git clone command is successfully executed. So similar thing that we have to do for a backend project as well. So let me just copy the backend URL. Let me just go to the Google Chrome. Let me just try to do the same with a backend as well. Let me just click on code. Let me just copy URL. Again, if you want, you can download the zip folder. And let me just come to my terminal, and let me just use git clone, and then let me just paste my URL, and then let me just hit the enter. So it will take some time, and it will again clone the repository. Now we have to just close the terminal. And again, one more thing that I just wanted to highlight, I am using a Mac operating system. So I'm just whichever operating system that you are using, maybe Windows, Linux, Unix or Mac, steps are exactly same. So there is no any difference between the steps depending upon the operating system. Now let me just close the terminal. If I just go to my finder again, and if I just go to the same location inside YouTube, inside e-commerce app, then we will find that there are two folders. One is the jwt-youtube, which is our backend project, and the second one is jwt-youtube-ui, which is our front-end project. Now let's see how we can run these things and how we can do some initial setup of these projects. So let me first of all open a VS Code, and then let me just try to open a folder, and let me just open the folder that I just cloned. So let me just go to the same location again, and make sure inside VS Code you are using the YouTube jwt-youtube-ui project. So let me just click on open. The first thing that we have to do is to install is to run the npm install command, so that it can create a node modules folder, and it can download all the required libraries for this project. So let me just open one terminal, and let me just use npm install command, and again make sure that you are connected to the internet, because it is going to download all the dependencies from over the internet to your local machine. And if you are just wondering like how it basically download the dependencies, so you can just check out my package.json file. Inside this package.json we have like dependencies, and inside the dependencies we have some dependencies like bootstrap, jQuery. So all these dependencies are mentioned inside this package.json file. So what Angular does is, whenever we try to run any npm install command, it basically comes to the package.json file. It basically analyzes that which are all the different packages that we require, and it basically downloads all the required packages. So this is how this npm install command works. One more thing that I just wanted to highlight is, make sure that you are using the same URL that I have provided in a description box. So I'm talking about this project URL or GitHub URL. So the reason why I'm forcing you to do is because I'm just using this a template, and if you see, like, there are few things that are already installed for this application, like bootstrap and jQuery is already we have already installed, right? So over here, if you see, there are also versions involved over here. So for the Bootstrap we have 5th version, for the jQuery we have 3.6 version. So I just want you to follow my link, because so that whichever steps I will perform, you should be able to perform those steps exactly, and I don't want any conflicts with this version. So if you are if you have the knowledge like how we can handle the conflicts with the version, you can definitely play around it. But if you are beginner and if you don't want to waste your time to if you don't want to waste your time to resolve the conflicts which related to the versions like Bootstrap version, jQuery version, so I'll just highly recommend you to go through my GitHub link only and just clone my GitHub repository only, so that my versions and your versions will always be the same. The same step that we have to do is with our backend project. So let me just first of all close this package.json file, and over here let me just first of all go to the IntelliJ. So let me just open the IntelliJ. So over here I will prefer the IntelliJ. This is basically what I love. But if you are a fan of Eclipse or STS, you can just definitely go ahead with that. Inside the IntelliJ, let me just try to open a folder, and let me just go to the same location again where we have just cloned our backend project. So make sure that you are just using this folder, which is jwt-youtube. Let me click on open, and again make sure that you are connected to the internet, because again whenever you will open it into a STS, Eclipse or IntelliJ, the first thing that it will do is it will just pull down all the Maven repositories that we have mentioned into our pom.xml file. So just make sure that you are connected to the internet again. The next thing that we have to do is to set up our database. So let me just go to the src. Inside the src, let me just go to the main, and inside the main again let me just go to the Java. If you see, inside the Java package we have many different packages created, and we have many different classes already created inside this com.youtube.jwt package. So this basically is the code for JWT token and role based authentication mechanism. So if you see, there are a lot of files involved to implement this JWT token and role based authentication mechanism. That's the reason I don't want to waste my time to writing this code again and again, because this is really very big code, right? So I don't want to waste my time to write this again and again, and that's the reason I just wrote it once and I just use it back to back. Then let me just come to these resources, and if you see, there is one properties file which is application.properties. Over here we have to make sure that whichever values we are using over here, those are correct. So let's start with the first value. So server.port is a 9090. I have wrote it 9090. So what does this property basically does is, whenever you will try to run the application, it will run the application on port 9090. So we have to make sure that this port number is correct in a front end and back end as well. So I'll just come to this in a moment. But the next thing that we have to make sure is our database URL. So over here we have two things. First one is a database port, and then second one is a database name. So for this series I'm going to use a MySQL. We have in the previous session itself we have discussed this thing that we are going to use a MySQL. So let me just try to first of all mention the correct port number over here. So if I just go to my MySQL workbench, and if you are just unsure like on which port your MySQL is running, so let me just tell you one command which will help you to find out on which port your MySQL is running. So we have this command show global variables like port. So this port is mentioned inside a single quote, so make sure you are just giving it correctly. And let me just try to paste this command, and let me just click on run. And if you see, it is giving me the value like port is equals to 3306, which means that my MySQL is running on 3306 port. So we have to use this port number only. And again 3306 is a default MySQL port for most of the people it will 3306 only, but if you have already changed, then make sure that you are just using the correct value. So whichever port number you will get over here, we have to just mention this into the IntelliJ application.properties file. So let me just use 3306 over here. Next thing that we have to do is we have to create a database. So let me just create one new schema, and let me just give the name as e_commerce_YouTube, like this, and let me just click on apply, and let me just click on apply again. On the left hand side you will see that there is one new database which is created. So let me just select that database, let me just right click, and let me just set it as a default schema. So why we need to set it as a default schema is basically like whichever command you will run in this section. So we have to make sure that these commands are running on our e_commerce_YouTube database only, because we have multiple databases. That's the reason we have to set it as a default schema. So it's basically really very similar to using the use db name. So these we have one more command that we basically use whenever we want to use any database from our console. So we use this particular command. So this particular action is exactly same by like using this particular command only. Now whichever name that you have given to the database, we have to just paste that name over here, and let me just save this. And again we have few more things, like we have the database username, and we have the database password. For me it's a root as a username, and root@123 is my password. So I know my credentials like username and password. So you have to just make sure that whichever username and password you have to just make sure that you are using the correct username and password. Next thing is we have the platform is equals to MySQL only. So if you are just using the MySQL database, then it will be the same for you. If you are using any other database, you have to just change the value over here. Now let me just save this code, and as of now let me just come to my VS Code. So we have to just make sure that on which port we have configured our UI as well. So let me just come to the src, and let me just come to the app, and also over here you will see that there are a lot of folders, lot of files are already added. So all these folders are files are basically related to the JWT token and role based authentication mechanism only. So let me just come to services, and if you just open any service like user auth service, then let me just try to open this service. So we don't have the required information here. Let me just open this user.service.ts file. Yeah, so on line number 9, if you see, we have the path of API, and if you see like inside this path of API we have configured one URL. So this URL is basically http://localhost:9090. So my UI is configured on the 9090 port. So like you can just do one thing, either if you want to run your backend code on the different port, so just you can just change the port like 8080, whichever port you would like, you can just use that port. But make sure that whichever port you will mention over here, you have to just make sure that this particular port is used at this place. So we have to just make sure that on the back end and on the front end same port numbers are getting used, otherwise you will end up with getting a lot of errors. Now my UI is configured to run on 9090 only, and my backend is also configured to run on 9090. So for me it looks pretty good. Now let me just save this particular information, and let me just try to run my backend project. So to run this, let me just come to the let me just open this JWT YouTube application file. In this file we have the main method, so make sure that you are using the correct file in which main method is present. And let me just right click on these, and let me just click on run on let me just click on this run option. So again, for the very first time, what it will just do is it will basically run your Spring Boot application. Alongside, it will just create the required tables into your databases. So if you see, my application is started successfully, and it is started on a 9090 port, as you can see over here. Now again, we have a lot of entities used in this same project. So if you just go to the entity package, you will see that there is one entity which is a role entity. There is one again one more entity which is a user entity. So all these entities like role and user are the tables from database perspective. So this table will be created automatically by the Spring Boot only. So let me just go to my MySQL workbench. Let me see whether these database tables are created or not. So let me just try to expand these, and as of now tables are not I'm not able to see any tables. Let me just try to refresh all, and if you see, like now we are able to see the different tables like role, user, and user underscore role. So if I just try to open the user table, if you see that there is one user which is already created. So I have wrote inside my application, like inside my Spring Boot code, I have wrote my code in a such a way that whenever you will try to run the application, it will always create one user which will be a admin user. So it will always create one user which is admin 123, and again it will always create one password. As of now the password is an encrypted format, so we are not be able to read it, but I'll just show you how we can use that password as well. So I just wrote this code in a such a way that whenever you will run the application, like backend application, it will always create one row, or it will always create one user which is the admin user. And if you see, like inside the rows role table, or inside the user underscore role table, if you see that admin 123 have the role as admin only. So we have two different roles, admin and user. So admin 123, as the name suggests, will have the admin role. So this is how I basically try to reduce my work by just configuring every single thing in the code only as of now. Let me just go to the IntelliJ again, and let me just quickly tell you where I just wrote that code to create the users whenever I'll just run the application. So if you just go to the services package, inside this we have one class which is a user service, and if you see, we have some method which is having the name as init role and user. So if you see, inside these we have few lines which will be responsible to create a admin user. So if you see, the username is set it as admin 123, the password is admin@pass, the first name is admin, last name is admin, and it will having the admin role. Similarly, I was using the user as well. So as of now these lines are commented out, so that's why we were not able to see any entry for the user Raj123. If you see, like the name is Raj123, so as of now this was commented, so that's the reason it was not created. So let me just remove the comment, and let me just restart the application, and let me just wait for a couple of seconds, and let me see whether this user gets created or not. And now my application started successfully. Let me just try to refresh the table, and let me just try to open the user table again. And now if you see, we are able to see the two different roles, admin 123 and Raj123. Admin 123 is having the admin access, Raj123 is a normal user which is having the user access. So this is how I reduced my work. Again, password are in the encrypted format, so you can just check out those password inside this user service.java file for both of the admin and for user. You can see the password and username as well. Now our backend setup is ready and everything looks fine. Let me just come to my UI. So let me just come to the VS Code, and let me just open a terminal, and now let me just try to run the application. So let me just use the command like npm run start. So for me the npm run start works. If you want to use the ngserve command, you can directly use ngserve command, or if you just want to use npm run start command and if it works on your machine, then you can just use the npm run start command. No matter whether we use npm run start or ng serves, the intention is same to run our project only. Now my application is UI files are compiled and application is running on localhost colon 4200 port. So let me just open my Google Chrome again and let me just use localhost 4200. And now as of now we are not able to see any single things on our home page, but we are able to see one button which is called as a login button. So let me just click on the login button and we have the username and password. As of now let me just use admin123 and admin@pass. Make sure that you are using the credentials as exactly same which we have seen previously, admin123 and admin@pass. And let me just come to the Google Chrome. Let me just click on login button. So if you see, it is clearly saying that you are admin. And if you are just looking into the navigation bar, there is one more link added into a navigation bar which is admin dashboard. So let me just click on this link. As of now this link will not work because we are on the same link only. So we are able to see that you are admin message. So this basically, like whichever credentials you are using, it basically automatically detects whether these credentials are admin's credentials or normal users credentials, and it automatically detects, and depending upon that it basically redirects you to the specific URL. So if you are login as an admin, it will take you to this particular URL like /admin, and it will just show you this particular message like you are admin. Let me just click on logout and let me just click on login again, and now this time let me just use Raj123 and let me just take a look to the password. So password is Raj@123. So Raj@123 is a normal user, and let me just click on login. Now if you see, it is showing me the message like you are a user. This URL is only accessible to the user. And if you see to the navigation bar, there is one link added which is user dashboard. So this code is intelligent enough that it basically detects whether you are logged in as a admin or a user. Depending upon that, it redirects you to the specific URL. So this is how this JWT token and role based authentication mechanism works. We are going to see a lot of things which are related to this only, but as of now my front end, back end and database is looking really very good and everything is running perfectly fine. I hope you followed the exactly same steps that I shown previously. So if you are just following the exact same steps, then you will not see any error, you will not see any difficulties to run the UI, backend and database on your machine. But still, if you have any doubts, any single thing, any single problem that you are facing, then let me just know into a comment section. I will try my best to help you out in these cases. In the next session, we will just try to walk through the code, and we will just try to get some knowledge on this JWT as well. We will just see what are different files we have implemented on the UI and backend side. So don't need to worry about, we are going to learn every single thing from the scratch. So I hope you enjoyed this session and I'll see you in the next session.